Welcome to MC Noctis, where every shadow has a story. Tonight, keep your ticket until the final stop, even if the driver insists the route has ended. At 12:46 in the morning, Elliot Vane watched 3 impossible stops appear on his transit app: a demolished shelter, a flooded quarry, and a black rectangle with no name. No one else on bus 375 seemed surprised. The old woman across the aisle tightened both hands around her purse. The driver covered the rearview mirror with his cap, and the 3 passengers who had boarded from an empty road slowly turned their heads toward Elliot without moving their bodies. Then the old woman stood and screamed that Elliot had stolen her wallet. The bus stopped immediately. Its doors folded open onto a highway rushing past at 60 miles an hour, although the bus itself was perfectly still. The old woman leaned close enough for Elliot to smell wet soil on her breath.
"Get off now," she whispered, "or they'll find out you're the one who taught them where to stop."
Elliot Vane made his living correcting frightening stories. His documentary channel, False Signal, began with manipulated photographs and invented hauntings. Over 6 years, it became something colder. Audiences wanted a clean answer, a guilty face, and one final image to replay in the dark. When the legend of Bus 375 reached him, he expected an easy episode. Every version sounded borrowed from the same old nightmare. The last bus leaving a mountain terminal, 3 silent strangers boarding from a deserted road, an elderly woman accusing a young passenger of theft, and the bus disappearing after she forced him to get off. The details changed constantly. The missing vehicle was found in a reservoir, a forest, or nowhere. Some accounts said the strangers had no feet. Others said their faces had been painted on. But Elliot noticed something no debunker had mentioned. The contradictions always appeared in the same order. First, a stop vanished. Then, a passenger vanished. Finally, the road itself vanished. The oldest version Elliot found was not online. It was folded inside a county transit report from November 1997. Route 375 had once run from North Mercer Station to Alder Ridge, a logging town beyond the Cascades. The report claimed the final service was cancelled during an ice storm, yet a handwritten mileage total showed that one bus had travelled 43 miles after midnight. Someone had drawn a line through 3 stops on the original route map. The first was Shelter 12, beside an abandoned cannery road. The second was Quarry Gate, where the highway curved around a flooded limestone pit. The last was a maintenance turnaround called Lower Depot. All 3 had been removed before the report was filed. Most retired employees hung up when Elliot mentioned the route. One former mechanic asked whether he had already bought a ticket. "No," Elliot said. "Then don't let anybody give you one." Before Elliot could ask why, the call ended. A moment later, his printer woke by itself. It produced a faded transfer ticket, punched with tomorrow's date. North Mercer Station had been closed for renovation, but one platform light still burned behind the construction fence. At 12:10 a.m., Elliot slipped through a gap, carrying cameras and the confidence of a man who had mistaken preparation for protection. 4 people waited beneath the dead timetable. Driver Frank Dwyer sat rigidly behind the wheel. Night shift nurse Dana Ruiz waited near the front. Young videographer Julian Cross filmed from the rear. An old woman in a brown coat held her purse beside the middle door. She watched Elliot step aboard. "Fare box is broken," Frank said. Elliot showed the transfer his printer had produced. The driver's face lost what little color it had. The old woman shut her eyes. The fare box accepted the ticket with a dry, mechanical bite. Somewhere beneath the floor, another machine answered with 3 slow punches. Then the doors closed, and the station lights went out behind them. For 20 minutes, Bus 375 passed warehouses and sleeping subdivisions. At a 24-hour gas station, the same cashier appeared in all 4 windows. Dana turned back, but the building had vanished into rain. Elliot checked the time. His phone read 12:31. 7 minutes later, they passed the gas station again. The cashier stood closer to the glass. This time, his hands were flat against it. Julian laughed nervously and aimed his camera outside. "Loop road," he said. "Driver missed a turn." Frank did not answer. His hands remained fixed on the wheel, making tiny corrections even when the highway ran straight. At 12:46, Elliot's transit app refreshed. 3 grey dots appeared beyond the official end of Route 375. No road connected them. The first was labelled Shelter 12. The second was Quarry Gate. The third was only a black rectangle. As Elliot raised the phone, the stop request cord pulled itself downward. The bell chimed. Frank whispered, "Nobody look at the door." Every passenger looked. There was no shelter outside. There was no intersecting road. 3 adults stood in knee-high weeds beneath a power line that had no poles. The first wore a 1940s wool coat. Beside him stood a woman in a pale uniform from another decade. The third wore a late 1990s business suit. Rain passed through them without darkening the fabric. The bus doors opened. A gust filled the aisle with leaves and cold metal. The strangers did not climb the steps. The wind folded them forward until they were suddenly inside. Elliot saw their shoes first. They were clean, polished, and several inches above the floor. Then the bus settled heavily on its suspension, as if it had taken on thousands of pounds. The fare box rang 3 times without receiving money. The strangers sat in separate rows. The woman chose the seat behind Dana. The man in the business suit sat behind Julian. The oldest one lowered himself beside the old woman. She began to tremble before he even turned toward her. Elliot kept his eyes on the window, using the reflection to study the strangers. Their bodies remained motionless. Their reflections did not. In the glass, the woman rested her chin on Dana's shoulder. The suited man opened his mouth impossibly wide. Inside it, the road behind the bus kept moving. Julian lifted his camera and fired its small LED light. For one white instant, their seats appeared empty. Then the light died. Something wet struck the ceiling. One footprint appeared above Julian, then another. Bare impressions crossed the ceiling panels toward the front, pressing downward as if an invisible person were walking upside down inside the roof. Dana grabbed the stop cord. Her fingers passed through it. The yellow cord had become a narrow length of tendon beneath the plastic skin. It tightened around her wrist and pulled her halfway out of the seat. Frank slapped the dashboard. The cord released her. "Do not request a stop," he said. "They decide who gets off." The old woman stared at him. "No, Frank," she murmured. "You decided that years ago." The first new stop arrived without the bus slowing down. One moment, rain blurred the windows. The next, they were parked beside the moss-covered Shelter 12, demolished in 1997. Someone waited inside. He wore Julian's jacket. The figure faced away from the bus, shoulders shaking. Julian stopped recording. When the figure turned, its face was older by decades, skin loose around familiar eyes. It raised a camera identical to Julian's and pressed the lens against the shelter glass. Julian's camera played footage by itself. On screen, he stood outside, filming his present self through the bus window. The clip was dated 29 years in the future. "Open the door," the older Julian mouthed. Frank stared forward. The three strangers turned their heads toward Julian. Their bodies still faced ahead. The old woman grabbed his sleeve. "If the person outside looks like you," she said, "never let it finish remembering your face." The shelter lights came on. There were dozens of other figures crowded behind the older Julian, each wearing the clothing of someone presently aboard the bus. Frank drove through the shelter without touching the accelerator. Concrete passed through the windshield like fog. Everyone became transparent. Elliot saw seat frames through Dana, cables through Julian, and the highway rotating beneath the floor. Then the world hardened again. One seat was empty. The old woman had been sitting beside the stranger in the wool coat. Now her purse remained on the cushion, but she was gone. Elliot stood. Her voice came from the ceiling vent. "Sit down. He counts movement." She emerged from the rear of the bus a moment later, crawling up the aisle on hands and knees. Her brown coat was soaked with black water. She claimed she had never left her seat. No one believed her. Dana checked the old woman's pulse. It beat once every 9 seconds. The stranger beside the abandoned purse slowly turned his head toward Elliot. His face was featureless, except for a small round opening where the mouth should have been. The opening tightened. The bus lost speed as though climbing a hill. The old woman lunged for her purse. "Don't let him count the empty places," she said. "Empty places are how the road gets inside." The old woman introduced herself as Agnes Wren. She called the strangers inspectors, not for any authority serving the living, but for journeys erased badly enough to trap people between the official road and the one actually taken. "They need an empty seat for every missing passenger," Agnes said. "When the count is correct, the bus reaches Lower Depot." "What happens there?" Dana asked. Agnes looked at Frank. He covered the rearview mirror with his cap. Hundreds of fingers answered beneath the seats, tapping metal in unison. Agnes suddenly stood. She pointed at Elliot and screamed that he had stolen her wallet. The change in her was immediate and convincing. Her voice shook with outrage. She demanded that Frank stop the bus and call the police. She clawed at Elliot's coat, as though searching for stolen property. Frank pressed the brake. For the first time, it worked. The bus stopped so violently that every living passenger lurched forward. The three inspectors remained perfectly upright. The front doors opened. Outside, the highway continued racing past at 60 miles an hour. Agnes pushed Elliot toward the open doors. Beyond the first step was not pavement. It was a narrow ditch running beside the moving highway, filled with men and women standing shoulder to shoulder in waist-high grass. They wore clothing from many decades. Every face turned toward the bus, mouths moving in warnings swallowed by the road. Elliot recognized faces from older Bus 375 videos. They were the witnesses the legend claimed had survived. Agnes pressed her lips to his ear. "Step down and everyone else goes home." Elliot looked at the people in the ditch. None cast a shadow. Each held a transfer ticket between two fingers. "You said the inspectors need empty seats," he replied. "You didn't say they let anyone go." Agnes shoved harder. Dana caught Elliot by the back of his coat. Julian seized Agnes's purse, hoping to find proof, a weapon, anything. The clasp broke. A transit badge, an old route map, and 29 punched tickets scattered across the floor. Agnes stopped pretending to be afraid. The three inspectors rose together. The tickets carried different years, but the same 3 punches. Agnes reached for them. "Put those back." Julian backed toward the open door. Panic had stripped him of loyalty. He told Dana to release Elliot. He said Agnes might be right. One person outside was better than 5 people reaching whatever waited at Lower Depot. Elliot saw the decision form in Julian's face before Julian moved. Julian drove both hands into Elliot's chest. Dana pulled Elliot aside, and Julian's momentum carried him through the doors. He did not fall onto the road. He fell downward through a vertical darkness that opened beneath the first step. His scream stretched into a low, mechanical groan. The doors closed. 3 seconds later, the rear doors opened. Julian stepped back inside.
His hair had gone white. His clothes hung from a body that seemed to have aged 30 years. Yet his face was still young around the eyes. He tried to speak, but only the stop request bell sounded from his throat. The suited inspector moved aside. Julian sat in the seat it had saved for him. The bus began moving again. Julian sat rigidly, ringing whenever he breathed. His reflection stood in the roadside ditch. Dana reached for him. Agnes stopped her.
"He is in 2 places now," she said. "If you pull one free, the other comes with him."
Elliot unfolded the map from Agnes's purse. It was not a passenger map. Red grease pencil marked a detour from the official highway onto a quarry service road. At the bottom was Agnes Wren's signature beneath the words, Night Dispatch. The date was November 18th, 1997. Agnes had not encountered the legend years later. She had been present when it began. Frank's cap slipped from the rearview mirror. For a moment, his reflection showed a much younger driver with ice crusted across his eyebrows. Both versions of him moved their mouths at different times.
Elliot turned to Agnes. "You deleted the stops."
The inspector in the wool coat leaned close to her. Agnes did not deny it.
"I corrected a report," she whispered. "The road did the rest."
In 1997, an ice storm closed the bridge north of Mercer County. Bus 375 carried 14 late-shift cannery workers, mostly temporary laborers, paid in cash and absent from company records. 3 supervisors ordered Frank onto a quarry service road, condemned after blasting fractured the limestone above the flooded pit. Agnes knew that. She also knew the company planned to close the depot after winter. Her pension required 18 more months. She cleared the detour. At 1:03 a.m., Frank radioed that the road was moving beneath the bus. Behind him, passengers were screaming. One of the supervisors demanded that Agnes record the route as cancelled, not diverted. Then the radio carried 3 heavy knocks. Frank asked Agnes to keep talking so he could follow her voice back to the highway. She removed her headset. The bus vanished with 18 people aboard. By dawn, the quarry wall had collapsed. The company buried the service entrance before investigators arrived. Agnes signed the corrected report at 9:40 that morning. The supervisors' bodies were never recovered. Neither were the passengers, Frank, or Bus 375. Every winter afterward, Agnes received a transfer ticket punched 3 times with a future date. When that date arrived, someone vanished near North Mercer. At first, Agnes tried to warn them. The bus ignored every ordinary request to stop. Then, during one desperate ride, she accused a young man of stealing her purse. The inspectors recognized accusation as official business. They allowed the bus to stop. Agnes told herself the young man had escaped. Years later, she saw his face in the ditch. She kept using the accusation. Each person she forced off delayed the journey to Lower Depot for another year. Each new witness told a damaged version of the story before disappearing completely. That was why the legend contradicted itself. The survivors were never safely home. They were speaking from different pieces of the unfinished road. "Why ride tonight?" Elliot asked. Agnes looked at his cameras. "Because you don't investigate stories.
she said. "You replaced them. I needed someone the world would believe instead of me." Quarry Gate appeared on Elliot's phone. The windows clouded from outside, hundreds of handprints pressed inward. Frank fought a steering column twisting like a spine. The road narrowed into tire tracks descending between wet stone. At the bottom waited a rusted chain-link gate. The bus passed through without breaking it. Beyond lay the flooded quarry. Black water stretched under the moon, smooth as polished glass. Beneath its surface, headlights burned. Another bus 375 rested upside down at the bottom of the pit. Its windows were crowded with faces. Dana pressed both hands to the glass. In the submerged bus, another Dana copied her movement from inside. Another Elliot held the camera. Another Agnes stood at the open doors, pushing someone out. The three inspectors stepped into the aisle. Their mouths opened. From each small, dark opening came the sound of a different emergency call from 1997. Frank begging for a tow truck. Passengers reciting addresses. Agnes saying repeatedly that no bus had been dispatched. Then the water beneath them began to rise through the floor. The water was dry. It climbed their shoes and legs as a moving black reflection, cold enough to stop breath, but leaving fabric untouched. Wherever it passed, the bus interior changed. Plastic seats became cracked vinyl. LED lights became yellow bulbs. Advertisements peeled backward through decades into blank metal. Frank grew younger in the driver's seat. Agnes grew older. Julian flickered between both versions of himself. The 1997 passengers returned by degrees. Dents in cushions, hands on knees, tired faces in windows, and finally bodies. There were 14 of them. They wore canary coats and work boots dusted white with limestone. Lunch pails sat at their feet. No one looked at Elliot, Dana, or Agnes. They watched the three inspectors. The inspectors had not boarded the original bus as passengers. Their badges had given them authority over the route, the records, and the people whose existence could be denied. Even dead, they were still counting who mattered. One lifted a paper punch. It pressed the tool against Dana's shadow. A perfect round hole appeared in the darkness beneath her feet. Dana staggered as the hole widened. Through it, Elliot saw the flooded bus below them. Dana's other self looked upward from behind the glass and began pounding to be released. Agnes said the inspectors were collecting unpaid fares. Someone living had to surrender a beginning, a destination, and a witness, or the bus would take pieces from everyone. She pointed at Elliot's cameras. "Give them the recordings." Elliot understood. His footage held the journey's beginning, and his audience would become its witnesses. The bus might follow them instead. Dana understood too. For one terrible second, she reached for his camera. Elliot backed away. They looked at each other, not as allies, but as two people measuring which life could be spent more easily. Then Dana lowered her hand. "That is how this started," she said. "Someone decided strangers were cheaper." She kicked the paper punch from the inspector's hand. It struck the floor and punched a hole through the bus itself. Wind screamed upward from a road far below. The inspector turned its featureless face toward her. Every light went out. In darkness, Elliot heard Julian's throat ringing faster. Each chime matched one of the marks on Agnes's tickets. 3 punches marked 3 erasures: the illegal detour, the abandoned emergency call, and the corrected report. The inspectors were not taking them randomly. They were forcing the bus to repeat those decisions until someone completed what had been interrupted. Elliot found the stop cord above him. It felt like ordinary plastic again. He pulled it. Agnes screamed. The bus stopped at Shelter 12. This time, the concrete shelter was full of cannery workers waiting in the ice storm. They held exact change in gloved hands. Frank opened the doors. One by one, they boarded. With every passenger, the bus grew colder and larger inside. New rows unfolded from the darkness behind the rear seats.
The ceiling rose until the handrails disappeared overhead. The fast erasure had been reversed.
The inspector in the wool coat folded backward into its seat, limbs bending like an umbrella forced shut. But the other two remained standing. On Elliot's phone, Shelter 12 became a solid white dot. Quarry Gate began pulsing next. Elliot pulled the cord at Quarry Gate. The bus plunged beneath black water without a splash. Pressure bowed the windows. Former witnesses and searchers floated upright beyond the glass, still holding glowing flashlights. Ahead stood the original Quarry Gate, chained across the submerged service entrance. Frank stopped the bus. "I called 3 times," he said. His voice was younger now. The radio on the dashboard crackled. Agnes's voice, from 1997, answered that Route 375 had been cancelled before departure. The second inspector held out its hand to her. Agnes sank into a seat. "I was afraid," she whispered. The gate did not move. "That isn't the truth," Elliot said. Agnes looked at the rows of workers. Fear had been part of it, but not all. She had calculated the value of her pension against the value of people whose names were absent from payroll. At last, she said, "I knew they could disappear without costing the company anything." The chain snapped. Quarry Gate turned white on Elliot's screen. The second inspector collapsed into an empty uniform. The bus descended through the broken gate. The quarry floor opened into a tunnel, lined with old transit shelters. Hundreds stood on both sides of the road, each from a different year. Inside waited the people Agnes had forced off the bus. Alive, dead, young, aged, sometimes all at once. They watched her pass. Lower Depot waited at the tunnel's end. It was a vast terminal built from erased records, unclaimed coats, broken radios, and faceless photographs. Unnumbered buses idled beneath stone. The third inspector stood beside Frank. It wore the business suit of the supervisor who had ordered the report changed. Its small mouth opened, and the fare box displayed one final empty slot. Agnes grabbed the old map and tore it in half. The terminal multiplied. Every torn piece became another platform.
Every platform held another bus 375. Their doors opened together. Agnes ran toward the rear exit. Dana blocked her.
"If you erase it again,"
Dana said,
"how many roads do you think it will make?"
Agnes struck her with the purse and reached for Elliot's recorder. Elliot and Agnes fell against the fare box. The old tickets spilled across the aisle and unfolded into moving fragments of road. Tiny passengers struck soundless fists against printed windows. Agnes seized Elliot's recorder. "People don't want truth," she hissed. "They want a woman who saved a boy from ghosts. Give them that, and the bus stays a story." Elliot saw the temptation clearly. A simple ending would protect his career. Agnes could remain the brave old woman. The company was gone. The dead were strangers. Julian had betrayed him. Dana had nearly traded his audience for her life. He could make the lie beautiful. Instead, he switched the recorder on and placed it in Agnes's hand. "Then tell the ugly version." The third inspector reached for her shadow. Agnes began with the detour.
She described the condemned road, the supervisors, the workers, the radio calls, and the report she corrected.
When she tried to say she had no choice, the fare box remained open. At last, she said the sentence she had avoided for 29 years. "I chose the people no one would count." The fare box closed. Every bus in Lower Depot shut off at once. The silence lasted one breath. Then all the doors opened. The forgotten passengers stepped onto the platform, the 14 workers, and everyone sacrificed afterward. They moved with the exhaustion of travelers finally told they had arrived. As they passed Agnes, each placed a punched ticket into her purse. The purse became impossibly heavy, its strap cut into her hands. She begged Elliot to help her lift it. He could not. The third inspector removed its human shape like a coat. Beneath it was only a vertical absence filled with turning wheels and wet road. Agnes tried to run. The passengers opened a space in their procession, and the absence folded around her. She vanished without a scream. Frank finally turned from the wheel. His younger face was bruised by cold, but he smiled at Dana and Elliot. "End of the line," he said. Julian rang once behind them. Frank opened the front doors. Beyond them was North Mercer Station at dawn. Elliot and Dana stepped down. Julian remained seated, staring at his older reflection. The doors closed before they could pull him free. There was no bus 375 behind them. The platform was fenced, dusty, and dry. According to the clock above the entrance, only 11 minutes had passed. Dana's watch recorded 7 hours. Elliot's cameras contained no video. Every file showed a black screen, but the audio tracks were full. Hundreds of voices told contradictory versions of the legend. Beneath them, Julian repeated one sentence through the stop bell. "Do not give it a root." Dana told Elliot to destroy the files. He promised he would consider it. By noon, he had already begun editing. He told himself the victims deserved a record, and that Agnes's confession could expose the company. Millions of witnesses would make the truth harder to erase. All of those things were true. So was the fact that this would be the largest episode of his career. 3 nights later, False Signal published the correct route of Bus 375. It reached 10 million views before sunrise. The first reports arrived in the comments. An Ohio viewer found a new late-night route. An Arizona driver filmed 3 gray stops beyond his line. In Boston, an unnumbered bus opened outside a closed station. Each app used the same symbol for the final stop, a black rectangle. Elliot removed the episode. Copies multiplied faster than he could report them. Reaction channels isolated Agnes's confession. Podcasts remixed the emergency calls. Viewers visited North Mercer Station carrying antique tickets and brown purses. Dana called once. "You didn't expose the road," she said. "You paved it." The call ended with a stop bell. She did not answer again. At 12:46 the following night, Elliot's apartment windows filled with amber light. A city bus waited at the curb below. Its destination display was blank. Julian stood inside, wearing a conductor's coat, his hair white, his face young. Across the street, 6 of Elliot's subscribers were already filming. The doors opened. They applauded and climbed aboard. Elliot never released another investigation. He spent winter deleting maps and watching Route 375 appear in cities that had never possessed it. Every correction made the legend more precise. Every warning gave it another audience. By spring, the bus no longer waited near stations. It stopped outside hospitals, restaurants, apartment buildings, and 24-hour stores. It arrived wherever someone watched the episode after midnight. The last surviving clip from Elliot's channel contains only a dark window and his reflection. Behind him, a stop cord lowers by itself. Then Julian's bell rings 3 times. The lesson was never that people should believe every frightening story. It was that some stories do not need belief. They only need directions. Thank you for listening to MC Noctis.
If this story followed you into the silence, share your interpretation in the comments and subscribe for the next journey into the dark. And if an unfamiliar bus appears on your route tonight, let it leave empty.